need it or not. Okay. Right, so Burwood Road College offers many subjects in its IT degree. Each subject is identified by a subject code and has a title and description. So when you read the second line, right, it actually emphasizing which noun is important in the first sentence. So they're talking about the subjects, right? So definitely it looks like the subject or subjects actually looks like an entity, isn't it? And it says the subject is identified by the subject code, right? So subject code looks like an attribute which describes the subject, or looks like actually the primary key, right? And it also says it has a title. So subject has a title. Again, it is a description of a subject, so that means it's an attribute. And subject description, again, it is an attribute of the subject, right? So there are three attributes which describe this object, right? So we identified one already. So what we can do is, while we're reading these sentences, if you capture some important thing, what I do is, actually I try to model it. Sometimes some people wanted to read everything, but for my approach, I mean, you can adopt this or the other way, but my approach is, when it appears like an entity, I straight away capture it, right? So because it's easier for my later work. So always I can come back and modify my ER diagrams, okay? Right, so I straight away draw that entity, that is the subject entity, subject. So I already know there are three attributes for the subject entity. So 1, 2, and 3. Right. So the first attribute is subject code. Second attribute is title. And the third attribute is the description. Right, so I already identified the identifier subject code, so I underline it. Right, so basically we modeled the subject, right? Right, now let's read this. The subject code, the title, description do not change over the life of the subject, right? What do you mean by that? The subject code, title, description do not change for the life of the subject. So that means these three attributes basically fixed, right? So these three attributes basically fixed. So then you should actually need to be reminded, you need to get a kind of an idea, right? So that means there can be some variable attributes lurking somewhere. That is why they have explained that, isn't it? Right, now remember, in any entity we can have fixed attributes and variable attributes, right? So you need to split it, right? You have to split it into another entity if you have the variable attributes, right? So far these three are fixed, so we can keep it in the same entity, right? So next line, a subject may be run over many semesters and years, right? Okay, so they're talking about semesters and the years, right? Right, for example, semester 1 2011, semester 2 2011, etc., etc. Right, so that means now semester details, so semester information and the years that the subjects are offering also actually are attributes of subject, isn't it? The attributes of the subject. But these two attributes keep changing, right? Meaning these are actually variable type of attributes. So if you have the variable attributes, you can't keep it in the same entity, isn't it? The main reason is, remember I have explained you last time, the main reason is if you mix up fixed and variable attributes in a same entity, then you will end up in more and more redundant information, right? Redundancies means what? What is the main problem of redundancy? Redundancy will lead to anomalies, right? Delete anomalies, insert anomalies, update anomalies. All these anomalies will happen if you have redundant information. So that means we need to now think about an alternative approach. So the alternative approach, as I mentioned before, is to take these variable attributes into a weak entity, right? So if I put into a weak entity, but if it is still related to the subject, that weak entity definitely depends on the main entity, right? So that means depend on the main entity means its identifier depends on the subject entity, right? Right, now let's open a weak entity, right? And then we can put that link, right? So that weak entity actually records what? The variable information, right? So in this case, we can name that entity as subject offering, isn't it? Subject offering, right? So one subject can be offered as many times as the organization requests. In this case, we are offering the subject in 3 occurrences in our case, right? But in this scenario, they have 2 occurrences, semester 1 and semester 2. So that means now we need to now identify, so we need to get rid of this. So now just keep it there. We need to now identify the variable attributes in here. So there are 2 variable attributes. The first one is the semester, and the second one is the year. Right. So, right. So once we identify these attributes, now let's think about the cardinalities, right? So cardinality relationship and the cardinality constraint, right? So one of these entities associated with many of these entities, that, right? So because one subject can offer in many times in the year, so one to many, right? So one to many, so one instance or one subject, one of these entities will related with many times of this entity. That is what we mean by one to many, right? Cardinality. Then the participation is, if you have one subject offering, now let's go through from here to there, cardinality constraint from bottom to top, right? First, let's start bottom. If you think about one subject offering, it must belongs to one subject, right? It must be, you can't have any subject offering without related subject, right? That is not possible. So if there is a one offering, it must belongs to one particular subject. So that is why we put the mandatory one there. But if you think about one subject, it can be or may not be offered in particular semesters. Am I right? One subject may or may not be offered in particular semester. So that means I have an optional constraint there, right? Optional cardinality constraint or participation constraint. Okay, right. So we establish the cardinalities, or cardinality constraint, and the relationships. And the next thing is we need to now determine what is the identifier for this weak entity, right? Now remember, as I mentioned before, if once you split the variable entities into another weak entity, this entity will depends on the main entity. So that means we need to grab the subject code from the subject to the subject offering, right? So that means I need to now underline the relationship. So I can see, I can tell the relation, and I can give a name for that relationship. One subject has many offerings, right? So therefore, the subject offering identifier is subject code, right? Plus what else? Now, subject code is not only the subject code is enough to identify the uniquely the rows in this entity, isn't it? So we need to combine the subject code with the semester and the year, right? So subject code plus semester plus year will form a perfect identifier for the subject offering, right? So that is the main idea. Okay, right? So now we have actually completed this model. So now what we can do is, now we can jump to the second sentence, or the second paragraph actually. Right, so each semester a subject assigned to a one lecturer, that lecturer can change from semester to semester. Right, so that means, what do you mean by this? Right, semester subject assigned to one lecturer. So that means the lecturer looks like another entity, isn't it? Another noun which is associated with the subject, right? So then it says the lecturer can change from semester to semester. And each lecturer has the lecture IDs and the names, right? So that means now they have given the attributes of the lecturers. So there are two attributes, lecture ID and the lecturer name. So I can actually easily now model the lecture, because I have now enough information to model this entity. So I can I can now go back and let's model it. Probably let me put somewhere here. Okay. So this is my lecture entity. Lecture. This is my lecture entity. Right. Then they have given some attribute for the lecturers. There are two attributes, lecture ID and the lecturer name. Yeah. I can say lecture ID and the lecturer name. So obviously the lecture ID looks like the perfect identifier. So that means this is a strong entity. Yeah. All right. Now the next question is, now this is the lecturers. Now how are we going to relate this one? So do we have a relationship with this one or subject, or do we have a relationship with the subject offering, right? So if I link the lecturer with the subject, what do you mean by that? So if I link the lecturer with the subject, that means each lecturer is delivering the subject irrespective of the semester. So it looks like we fixing the lecturer to a subject permanently, isn't it? But that is not the case. According to this scenario, they says semester to semester, the lecturers can change, right? The lecturer can change from semester to semester. So that means we can't link the lecturer with the subject, but we need to link the lecturer with the subject offering, right? So lecturers can, now let me put the relationship name. So lecturers are delivering the subjects, right? So lecturers are delivering the subjects. Then what else it says? Right, so let me identify, do we put the identifiers already? A lecturer may lecture in more than one subject in a single semester. Now, when you read that, it will give a kind of a clue how the cardinality, isn't it? A lecturer may lecture more than one subject in a single semester. So it gives you a clue how these two entities are related to each other. So that means one lecturer can now lecture more than one, right? So many subjects, right? So many n comes in there. So one lecturer can teach many subjects, right? If you think about one subject offering, that subject offering must have a related lecturer, right? But one lecturer may or may not delivering many subjects. May or may not, right? There is no mandatory saying one lecturer must deliver many subjects, right? So that means there is optional cardinality constraint there, right? And right, so we identify the relationship, we identify the cardinality relationship and the cardinality constraints. Now my question is, do I need to underline the delivering relationship? If I underline the delivering relationship, that means I'm grabbing this lecture ID from right to left, right? Do I really need to take lec ID as a part of the identifier for the subject offering? Probably not. We don't need it, right? We don't need it. Now remember, when you are identifying the primary keys, one of the key principle or key, would say, uh, teaching or key norm is we need to use fewer columns as possible. Right now, lecture IDs give a kind of a mean, um, uh, but but it is not necessary to make it part of the identifier. But the problem of this is, if I take the lec ID as a part of the identifier in the subject offering, is when you have some subject offering, when you decided to have one subject offering, you must assign the lecturer prior to inserting anything here, right? So what will happen if a lecturer says, I'm resigning the next semester, then you all of a sudden you need to come back and modify or update the subject offering details, right? So it is not advisable actually to take lecture ID as a part of the identifier for the subject offering, right? So I will leave the lecture ID as is without having part of the subject offering. So you don't need to actually underline the delivering relationship, right? So that is the reason. Okay, right. So we clarified that here. Now let's jump to the third paragraph now. The college has many students. Okay, now they are talking about students, right? They are talking about students. Each student has an ID, right? Okay, and the name. So looks like two attributes describing the students. So that means there is another entity comes into play, students entity, right? Right. So why not I grab that and identify it, we model it in our diagram. So I can go back, uh, then I can model the student first. Okay. So let me put that there. Right. So this is my student entity. And that entity has two attributes, I suppose. Yes, student ID and the student names, isn't it? So let me capture that first. So let me write something here, student ID and the student name. Right, so student ID. So I just put SID, okay? SID means student ID. And then the second one is student name. STU name. Right, so what I can do is now, so definitely student ID is the primary key to identify uniquely each student, so it should be the primary key. The next question is, now what is the next question? So now next question is, how we going to relate into here, right? So this model, how this entity related with this model, right? So what we can do now, let's read the scenario a little bit because then it clarifies how we're going to link it. So each student may enroll in one or more subjects offering. So they are enrolling more than one subject offering, one or many, right? So after completing the subject and its various assessment items, okay. The student is awarded a grade. Okay, grade. So they are talking about the grade here. Grade for that particular subject, HD, OP, ON, etc., etc. So students may enroll in one or more subject. That is what they are talking about, enrollments. So enrolling, right? So if I go back, so looks like there is a relationship between the students and the subject offering, right? So one student can enroll many subject offerings, right? And one subject offering can have many students, right? So looks like there is a many-to-many relationship between subject offering and the student, okay? Right, so if you have many-to-many relationship, what is the rule? I need to take that off and then create a weak entity in the middle, right? So let's create the weak entity straight away. So I will write the weak entity somewhere, maybe here. Right, so let me put something like that. So that means this entity and this entity has a relationship. So what we need to do is, remember, we need to reverse the relationship. So we reverse the many n towards the weak entity, and we reverse the many n towards the weak entity. Okay, we will get this. So students are enrolling in the subject offerings. So this is actually where we record the enrollment details, right? So we can actually rather straightforwardly we can write the name for this particular object. So enrollment. So students are enrolling the subjects, and then they do various assessment, and then they are getting the grades. So we need to now capture the grades, right? They're talking about the assessment actually, but they don't have specified what are the assessment types they are going to do. So therefore, We don't need to actually have we don't need to have a kind of entity for the assessment, right? Because they haven't specified that. What they specified here is they are getting some grades once they undertake this assessment, right? And they are getting grades. So grades is an attribute. So where are we going to fix the grade? So can I fix the grades to the students? Obviously, students are the ones who getting the grades. Some people may think, okay, let's put the grades here, but actually student entity is not the place the grade is belongs to, because students are attempting the subjects. So attempting or the enrollment entity is the perfect place to record that information, because each attempt has a grade, right? So this is the perfect place. So I just record the grade here, right? Now I need to think about the enrollment entity, and what should be the identifier for the enrollment, right? So because enrollment by itself can't have its own identifier, isn't it? If you think about each single enrollment, that single enrollment is a reflection of the student and the reflection of the subject, right? So that means definitely we need to take the identifiers from the both end to define the identifier for the enrollment, right? So that means we need to underline the relationships between the subject offering and the enrollment and the student and the enrollment to show that we are grabbing the identifiers. So subject offerings has an enrollment, and each student has an enrollment, right? Right, so we know the identifier for the enrollment now. The identifier for the enrollment is subject code, semester, year, plus student ID, right? Right now we need to think about the cardinalities and cardinality constraints and cardinality relationships. So one subject offering has zero or many enrollments, because sometimes you may have no enrollment at all, right? So zero many enrollment. So the participation is not mandatory, so the optional. But if you think about one enrollment, that enrollment must belongs to a one or many subject offering. So must belongs to a one actually subject offering. One enrollment belongs to one subject offering. So the mandatory goes to the other side, right? Right. So if you think about this side, one student can enroll in many subjects. So you guys are enrolled in 4 subjects, isn't it, in this semester? So one to many, right? That is the relationship, cardinality relationship. If you think about the cardinality constraint, now let's go from enrollment to students. If you have one enrollment must have associated student, but that student can have actually can enroll either 0 subject or many subject, isn't it? So the cardinality constraint in the other side is optional, right? Because some students may not enroll in a particular subject in a particular semester at all. So the optional, okay? Right, so that means now we have modeled the relationship. So we identified the identifier or the primary key for the enrollment. So now looks good. Now let's go to the rest. Right, so we record the grade, so we capture that information. Right, now we can move to our 5th paragraph. So during the semester, a student may post comments to an online discussion board. Only the students who are enrolled in the subjects are eligible to post the discussion board comments. Right, so they are talking about comments. They're talking about discussion board. Right, so we have two things. Comments and the discussion board looks like a synonym, isn't it? The same thing. Discussion board means the comments. So discussion board is a place where they put the comments. So the comments are placed in the discussion boards. It looks like we don't need to have two things here, right? So both actually explaining the same thing, right? The only students who are enrolled in the subjects are eligible to post the discussion board comments, right? So that means the comments probably we can take rather than discussion board, because comments are posted by the students who are enrolled in the particular subject, isn't it? Right. So now my question is now whether the comment is an attribute or a kind of a entity, right? So let's read the last sentence, or the second last sentence. The college is required to keep the track of each comment. Now we need that. What do you mean by that? The comments need to keep the track of each comment. So that means we need to capture the information that what people are commenting, right? So that means definitely comment looks like kind of a placeholder where we can put the all these information, right? So each comment has a date, time that it was made, right? So date and the time, right? So date and the time. So comment has a date and the time. So looks like date time is an attribute that reflect the comments, right? So so guys, give me one sec. I will just let my cat out. Sorry guys. So date time is kind of an attribute, yeah. So we can actually capture that somewhere here. Let me make a kind of now we know the comment is a kind of a entity. So and there is two attributes, date and the time. Actually, we can say the date and time as one attribute because so let me write the name of this. So comment, right? So we have an attribute called date time. So students are posting the comments, right? So let's a student may make many comments in any subject he or she is enrolled in. So that means one student can post many comments, right? So one to many, yeah. So one to many relationship between the student and the comments. Right, now the thing is this. Now when you kind of now how to actually record the text, the comment text. So that means we need to have another attribute, isn't it? The comment need to be recorded. So we have the date column and the comment text column. So the comment actual comment line, yeah. So that means we need to have another attribute. I will write it as a comment text. Comment text. Now my question is, what kind of entity is this, right? Because you can see from here, the comments actually depend on the student, right? So we need to know which student have made that comment, right? So that means comment entity can't sustain by itself. It need to depend on this entity, right? So that means a comment is not a strong entity at all. So it looks like a kind of a weak entity, right? Because it depends on the students, right? Because if I leave the comment as a separate entity, it can't sustain by itself, yeah? So that means, what do you mean by that? That means comment looks like a weak entity, not a strong entity. It depends on the student, right? So that means what is the identifier or the primary key for the comment? It depends on student ID. So that means I need to underline the relationship line in order to show that we are taking the student from the left to right. Then student ID itself is not enough to make the identifier for the comment. So we need to pick something else from here as well. So the perfect other other attribute that goes along with the student ID is date and the time, right? So student ID plus date and the time will make a kind of a perfect identifier for the comments, right? So let me write the name of the relationship. So students are posting the comments. So posting relationship. Right, so we identify the cardinality relationship one to many. Now we can identify cardinality constraints. So uh, one student can post many comments. So he can actually post 0 comments as well. He don't want to. There is no mandatory saying every student must comment, right? So that means the cardinality constraint or the participation constraint is 0, right? 0 or many, right? Then if you think about the other way around, the constraint between the other way around from right to left, if we have one comment, that comment must belong to a one particular student, isn't it? So there is a mandatory participation or the cardinal constraint from right to left, right? So we have more information now. Yeah, so what it says is students are commenting the subjects they have enrolled in, right? Right now, I made a mistake, right? Now I made a mistake. What is the mistake I made? Now see this problem, right? A student may make many comments in any subject he or she enrolled in. So I made a big mistake because what does it mean? Now if I actually link the student with the comment, it means any student can make a comment, right? But it is not the case. People who only enroll can comment in the subjects. So that means actually this relationship is wrong. So what I need to do is this relationship actually coming from not from the students, but it coming actually from the enrollment. Simply. So one enrollment can have 0 many comments. One enrolled student can have 0 many comments. But if there is a one comment, that comment must belongs to that particular comment must belongs to one enrolled student. So I just put posting the comments. So what is the identifier again? So this can't depend by itself. You need to identify who has posted or who that comment is belongs to, and which subjects that comment is coming from. So that means that information is there already as part of the identifier. What is the identifier for the enrollment, by the way? Subject code, semester, year, and the student ID, right? So there are 4 attributes as part of that identifier for the enrollment, right? Subject code, semester, year coming from this side, student ID coming from that side. So all these 4 attributes now going to here, the comment as the part of the primary key, right? And then there is another uh, uh, date and time there, right? So how many attributes we have in this particular comment entity? 4 coming from there, and 1 is there. So 5 attributes as a part of the primary key plus 1, 6. Yeah. Right, so that is how we model it. I think that's what it says. Yeah, so nothing else. So we can draw the ERD diagram and then we can convert that into the relational scheme. I think this looks okay. Yep, so this looks okay. So this is my final entity relationship diagram for that problem, right? So we have 3 strong entities and 3 weak entities, right? So why we have this weak entity subject of link? Because we split the fixed information with the variable information, right? So these two actually contains almost similar info which related to the subject, right? But we split it into 2. So variable info there and fixed info there. Okay. Yeah, so that is the final solution for question number 13. Okay.